So yesterday we covered Nightmare on Elm Street 2, which had been a nice commercial success but a bit of a critical failure, which meant that when doing a follow-up, New Line Cinema had to tread a little lightly. A sequel was desirable, because money, but another badly received title could kill the franchise dead. There was even consideration at some point in pulling the plug on any third entry at all, which would have been a terrible decision, because as it turns out, A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors, absolutely rules! As I've already covered in yesterday's video, Nightmare on Elm Street 2 was a weird but kind of interesting diversion for the franchise, completely abandoning the dream-killing slasher setup of the first film in favour of a very gay-coded possession story. Elm Street 3, though, is a return to the nightmare-stalking murders of that first flick, and oh my god, is it good. The film was directed by Chuck Russell, the creative filmmaker who'd famously go on to make the extremely stylized Mask movie, and the script was co-written by both Chuck, his friend Frank Darabont, who made The Shawshank Redemption, novelist and screenwriter Bruce Wagner, as well as Elm Street's original visionary and creator of Freddy Krueger, Wes Craven. So an absolute dream team of talent there, with Wes perhaps being the most important figure among them. Initially, Wes wanted nothing to do with any of the Nightmare sequels, having been both a vocal critic of the second film's creation and its end result. But when New Line Cinema, in seeking to make a more respectable third film, approached him with the offer of participating on this third entry, he said yes, stating that, "I wanted to do Nightmare 3 because I felt compelled to come back and expand the original concept. I like taking that one more step, and it was important for me in a business sense that I was able to negotiate a percentage point in the sequels I didn't have from the original film." He couldn't direct due to being tied up on another production, specifically his duties on the much maligned 1986 sci-fi horror Deadly Friend, but he floated an idea and they liked it enough that he was given script duty. He also agreed to take an executive producer credit and set off to work. The story goes that Wes wrote a version of the movie with his writing partner Bruce Wagner that came up with the concept of the Dream Warriors, the group of teens who would come together to fight Freddy and make up the film's central conceit. Their original script, which can now be easily found online, was much darker in tone than the one we ended up with a far more menacing Freddy who would casually drop the C-bomb like it was no big deal. Anyway, once they had both wrote the original piece and handed it in to New Line, Wes was pretty much pushed out of production, despite expecting a more hands-on role. In horror and sci-fi magazine Cinefantastique, Wes did an interview where he said, "My understanding was that I would be asked about things all along. I would be brought into the casting and have a real creative part in the picture. The reality was that New Line Cinema never really contacted me again after they had the script. They changed it quite drastically in some ways. The director and a friend of his rewrote it and changed the names of all the characters, and included several key scenes of their own. A lot of the reasons I had agreed to do the picture were taken away." Now, admittedly, this obviously really sucks for Wes, and I certainly don't want to celebrate my boy being done dirty like that, but it has to be said that Darabont and Russell's revisions brought a really welcome levity to the proceedings, injecting the film with a dark sense of humour and playfulness that comes across exceptionally in the finished film, and makes it one of the most beloved franchise entries and my own personal favourite. And it was this new tone and almost darkly mischievous portrayal of Freddy that would inform the icon in both the feature films and his hugely massive media presence that would follow. If Nightmare 1 made the icon, and Nightmare 2 made him chatty, then Nightmare 3 was where his role as a kind of beloved twisted jester was fully realised. Though obviously Craven and Wagner had a different initial direction in mind, I honestly think the end result we got was the best of both worlds. Building on Wagner and Craven's dark foundations with Darabont and Russell's carnival-like approach to impish, wondrous and frightening dreamscapes, to me, created the perfect middle ground between fun and fearsome. It is absolutely like my whole brand. Horror with a real defined heart and humanity, being the story of a lovable group of outcasts banding together and finding strength and friendship when society rejects them and a common enemy unites them. It's a film all about finding triumph in trauma and tenderness in terror. God, I love this movie. The film begins on an ominous note as Kristen Parker, played by Patricia Arquette in her first ever feature film role, makes a model of the Elm Street house from the previous films before heading to sleep. In a nightmare, Kristen wakes up on her bed and finds herself in front of that same house, although now with children playing outside. One child riding a tricycle compels Kristen to follow, and she goes inside, finding a derelict mess filled with the kind of foggy atmosphere and lighting we've grown to associate with this wonderful period of horror. After some creepy shenanigans with the little girl delivering some ominous lines, as little girls are prone to do in these movies, Freddy appears and gives chase, leading Kristen to grab the little girl and flee in an effort to save her. We get some fun little dream logic in the chase that feels shockingly familiar. I think at some point everyone has had this exact nightmare in their sleep, where they feel like they're running but not getting anywhere. That surreal sensation like your legs are in tar and everything's in slow motion. I'm surprised this wasn't done in either of the last two movies. It feels so obvious after seeing it here. During the attempted escape, at one point the little girl's voice attracts Kristen's attention, and she looks down to see that she's actually holding the child's skeleton. This is a pretty decent and scary visual. But according to the documentary Never Sleep Again, this was initially planned to be much worse. Apparently, the practical effects artist Mark Shostrom, who worked on both this film and helped put together some of the amazing work used in Freddy's Revenge, had made a kind of emaciated doll of the girl on the order of the filmmakers. However, after seeing the doll, director Chuck Russell was immediately taken aback by what he saw and just kind of went, "Whoa, I'm sorry, that's just too much." Apparently, Mark Shostrom is very good at his job. One of his practical effects on Elm Street 3 even got him a visit from the police after a neighbour saw the dummy he had made for one of the characters and called in reporting a mutilated corpse. Sucks to be talented, I guess. Anyway, the whole chase climaxes with Freddy cutting Kristen with his good old finger knives, and when Kristen wakes up in the real world, it looks to her mother like she has attempted to take her own life. This gets her checked into Western Hills Psychiatric Hospital, where when resisting the orderlies, she is calmed down by, holy shit, it's Nancy! Let me tell you, the first time I saw this movie not knowing she was in it, I popped as hard as I did when CM Punk returned. What a brilliant way to bring her back. She's gone through and survived the trauma of the first film, and instead of being broken down by it, she's used it to drive her into a career helping other traumatized kids. How very natural an evolution of that character. It just feels so right. After immediately bonding over a sing-along of 1-2 Freddy's Coming For You, I know, banger, Nancy introduces Kristen to the rest of our main cast, who are the most charming and likeable group of kids to ever unfortunately find themselves the target of a slasher villain. All here, in some form or another, because of their recurring Freddy nightmares, which the adults have diagnosed as a kind of shared hysteria. There's Philip, the sleepwalker, who has a hobby of creating marionette puppets. Roland Kincaid, who's tough as nails and at one point calls Freddy a pussy, so best character. Jennifer, an aspiring actress prone to burning cigarettes into her arm, which her parents took as self-harm but was actually self-preservation as she'd do it to keep herself awake from Freddy's attacks. Will Stanton, a young kid who loves role-playing games, bound to a wheelchair due to an implied failed attempt on his own life. Taron White, the abrasive, kinda punky teen with a troubled past with drugs. And finally, Joey Crusoe, who's socially awkward and completely mute, possibly as a result of his trauma. These lot are so great, just my absolute faves. I love them all. They're my babies. I want to take care of them. I don't want anything to happen to them. Oh yeah. Scratch that last point. The main thing is they are such a great little cast of characters. Everyone serves a purpose, nobody feels like filler, everyone has a unique identity and personality. They've all got these believable, interesting dynamics and relationships. Some don't like each other so much, some are best friends. It just really feels like this actual group of troubled teens that are just making do with the situation they are in. Also, it's so fucking refreshing to see a horror film set in a mental institution where the patients are the heroes. So many horror movies, including a lot of ones I love, really play into this whole crazy asylum maniac shtick that paints mentally vulnerable people as violent monsters, when in actual reality, statistics show that those who are mentally vulnerable are far more likely to be the victims of violence rather than the perpetrators. It's nice to see a psychiatric hospital setting that isn't all dangerous men in straitjackets and padded cells for once, because that's very overdone. Anyway, during her time at the facility, Kristen has another nightmare where Freddy attacks her, taking on the form of this awesome giant Freddy worm snake thing, which apparently caused some concern behind the scenes and had to go through multiple revisions, because at first, It looked too much like a big old dick with teeth. And yeah, I see it. Penis panic aside though, what a stunning bit of work this scene is. Just incredible practical effects work that uses 4 different ginormous puppets for different angles and functions seamlessly. Real 80s movie magic on display here. Especially when they get it to pick up Kristen and slam her down. It looks amazing. It's the kind of thing I can see the behind the scenes of and still not fully comprehend how they did it. Wizards, the lot of them. While impressive though, Kristen seems to be a little less than thrilled to be eaten by it. But suddenly Nancy comes to help and she seems just as surprised to be there as we are to see her. But with her aid, they manage to fight Freddy off for the time being. It turns out ever since she was a little girl, Kristen has had this strange ability to pull others into her dreams, and here she unwittingly did that to Nancy. Although they managed to survive that encounter, they're not out of Freddy's woods yet. The next night, we get some more fantastical brilliance when one of Philip's marionettes takes on the form of a claymation Freddy. And in what is probably one of the most horrific, wild, and memorable sequences of the whole series, Freddy makes Philip into a marionette of his own using his motherfucking veins as the motherfucking string. It is one of the most messed up and yet strangely magical moments ever put to cinema. The perfect combination of the horror of the body with the wonder of dreams. The kind of thing that could literally only happen in a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. The whole sequence is phenomenal. From its tension-building start as a Freddy puppet with an almost winking at the audience style smirk begins his sinister plan, to the striking final image of a giant Freddy dangling Philip over a window before cutting his strings and having him fall to his death. It is such an incredible marriage of murder and magic, and I think that's the main draw of Dream Warriors in general. It's so visually grand in its portrayal of nightmares. Everything is as crazy as can be. You've got Freddy as a giant snake, Freddy making vein flesh puppets, Freddy coming out of a TV, there's skeletons coming to life, fiery hellscapes, screaming flesh, wizards, giant spiked wheelchairs. The previous movies, including the masterpiece that is the first film, feel almost restrained in comparison. It's a straight up ride. And it helps that for the entirety of this roller coaster, you're in the company of one of the genre's greatest ever casts. And the rest of the film's events carries on effortlessly dancing along this fine line where one side is horror, character development and violence, and the other is the comedy, the magic, and the carnival-like delivery of fantastical dreamscapes. Constantly hitting that sweet spot that delivers on both, but never in a way where one outshines the other. As more of the teens begin to die, including Jennifer getting slammed into a TV as Englund delivers his most famous improvised line,
"Welcome to prime time, bitch!"
Nancy is able to convince their psychiatrist Neil Gordon to believe in Freddy after a group hypnosis session sees Kristen use her ability to pull them all into her dream. Later, while at Jennifer's funeral, Neil notices a nun lingering in the distance and goes to investigate. And this is where the film gets a little not great for me. You see, there's this B-plot through the movie about Freddy's origin that ties into how they find out how to defeat him in the end. But not only is more of an origin for Freddy not needed, like, I already have as much as I need to know in that he was a child killer that some vigilante parents burned alive and has somehow come back to take revenge. But the plot they choose to go with is bad. This might be a controversial statement, as I think this component of his character is actually considered a pretty good one amongst some of the fandom, but let me explain. You see, this ghost nun, and yes, she is a ghost, knows a bunch about how Freddy came to be and how he can be defeated. And that's because, twist reveal, this nun is actually the spirit of Freddy's mother, Amanda Kruger, going by the name Sister Mary Helner in this helpful ghost form. Anyway, well, she explains that Freddy happened because, well, she used to work at an asylum, right? And back in 1925, she mistakenly got locked in the tower over Christmas with a bunch of maniacs, the series use of the word, not mine. And well, these people, well, I can't use the R word because the YouTube algorithm will absolutely destroy this vid if I do, but I think you know what I mean when I say she was subjected to repeated attacks for this period and fell pregnant, making Freddy the bastard son of 100 maniacs. And just Why? Why does Freddy need this? What does this add? Can't he just be an awful prick? Why does he need to be some predestined evil brought on by magical evil maniac sperm? No, the film doesn't outrightly say it's this exact act that made him this great evil, but what else could its inclusion mean? It's either just a purely shocking unrelated anecdote, or the audience is supposed to make some connection to that being a factor in why he is the way he is. And not only does that really unfortunately kind of do away with the positive depiction of psychiatric ward patients we got in The Kids and give us the stereotype of the violent crazy they previously managed to avoid, it also just doesn't make sense. Like, is evil somehow genetic here? Is it because of this he can come back as a dream ghost somehow? Is it only evil because of the combination of the DNA of the 100 of them? Because that's not how reproduction works. And I don't mean to nitpick this like cinema sins here. I'm fine with the logic not totally working out if this added anything of value, but for me it has the opposite effect. It detracts from Freddy's mystery by over-explaining some horribly traumatic backstory. Freddy is a horrible asshole. I can just believe that. I don't need some weird explanation as to why. And all of this just to get us to the conclusion where Mama Kruger is just like, yeah, my dudes, just like, give my son a funeral and stick some holy water on his skeleton and shit. He hates that. That'll get him. Is there really no other way you could have wrote the discovery of that knowledge in? None at all? Definitely had to go on the assaulted ghost nun train on that one? Alright. This issue aside, however, the rest of the movie still just totally fucking slaps. When Joey gets attacked by Freddy and ends up in a coma, the institution's staff blame Nancy and Dr. Gordon prescribing the kids the experimental drug Hypnosil, a drug that Nancy takes that prevents dreaming. The two are both relieved of duty, leaving the group now without allies amongst the authority figures, and without someone fighting in her corner, Kristen is quickly sedated and put into isolation after she kicks up a fuss. While all this is going on, Nancy and the doctor track down someone who'd know where Freddy's bones are hidden. And oh sick! It's Nancy's dad! Another character coming back with purpose and a reason to be here. Now an alcoholic and disgraced ex-cop working as a security guard, another solid natural evolution following the events of the first film, he, with some reluctance, gives up the location of the bones. And then he and the doc head over to their location to put an end to Freddy, while Nancy runs back to the institution after hearing Kristen has been put under. She manages to convince the staff to let her back in to see the other kids, and they do a group hypnosis session to go inside the dream world and save their friends. This marks another one of my favourite moments in the film, as when the kids unite and face their fears, they become the Dream Warriors, inflected with lucid dreaming like powers, all reflective of their personalities and interests. Kincaid is now as tough as can be, Will is a wizard who can walk, and Taran is this switchblade wielding cool punk. I love this shit. At one point during the reveal of their dream forms, Taran says this:
"In my dreams I'm beautiful and bad."
And a lot of people point to this as a low point in the film, suggesting that it becomes too cheesy in this moment, or cringy, as us millennials would like to call it. But I love it. I think it's great. It's fun and campy and kinda sweet. I love that Taran calls herself beautiful while sporting this massive mohawk, something that doesn't really match the traditional standards of what beauty is often considered to be on a woman. I love that beautiful to her isn't inherently traditionally feminine, and we see this reflected in her character. It's a cool touch. And she is indeed bad. She is as cool as shit here. I wish she survived the film, but unfortunately her and Will don't make it. Doesn't stop them from getting a big heroic moment to shine and taking on Freddy one-on-one though, so that's awesome. Anyway, the film wraps up in a big satisfying climax, one that sees Freddy jumping between the real world to fight Donald and the Doctor, who are attempting to do a funeral with his bones, and the dreamscape to battle the kids and Nancy. Nancy dies in a moment that, because of all of the prior film and the way they used her as a mentor figure in this one, feels earned, shocking, and heartfelt. Eventually, the kids keep Freddy occupied long enough that the Doctor is able to give Freddy his funeral and the killer is defeated, before we close on Nancy's funeral and that previously mentioned Ghost Nun is Amanda Kruger reveal. And yeah, that's the movie. Damn man, there is a lot going on in this one, but it never feels overloaded or messy. Sure, I could have maybe done without that bastard son of 100 maniacs shite, but all things considered, it's a constantly engaging delight that breezes by, in its 96 minutes of runtime. In case it isn't already obvious, I absolutely love the movie. I'm actually annoyed at myself for writing some of these videos out of order, because I want to call it a perfect movie, because it is, but then people in the comments will be like, how can it be perfect if it has that bit you don't like in it? But I have this whole big ramble about what I mean when I say perfect movie in a later video that explains that, and I don't want to repeat myself, so just go with it for now and I'll make sense later. Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors is an absolutely perfect movie for me. Does it have a pretty big flaw that rubs me the wrong way? Yeah, but it doesn't matter. It's still perfect. There is too much good going on here to be brought down by any of its issues. The kids are an absolutely brilliant bunch that I loved spending time with. The set pieces and nightmare sequences are the best in the series. Its tone is pitch perfect, balancing both the scary and the surreal effortlessly. Its practical effects are to die for. Freddy's characterization is one of the definitive takes on the character, it's impeccable. I love the first film, and I think it's a masterpiece that isn't really surpassed by this entry. But just on a personal level, I actually think I like Dream Warriors better. It's just such a me movie. It finds such a heart in amongst all the horror through the teens and their friendship, and that's just exactly the kind of thing I look for. And it's in a slasher movie. The genre of nihilism, of cynicism, of cheap thrills and tacky exploitation. Or maybe not. Because as Nightmare on Elm Street 3 proves, slashers, like any other genre, can be jaded, mean-spirited cash grabs, or they can be fantastical wonderlands, handcrafted by people who care about their characters, about their ideas, about the story, and the empowering messages the genre can have. Slashers, like any genre, can be lovely, and Nightmare on Elm Street 3 is a lovely thing indeed. Oh, and it also has the most banging theme music ever! That's all we have time for today, peeps. That's not a thing I say, don't know where peeps came from. Whatever. If you've enjoyed this video, please do let me know with a like or a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to my Only Dance by hitting that red button down below. And if you'd really like to help support the channel and help make it so that I can do more big projects like this, then you can become a patron and get some exclusive perks at the Patreon link in the description. Anyway, please do join us again in the next video for Freddy's 4th outing, the Dream Master. And until then, I've been Dan Drambles, you're watching Wholesome Halloween 2 Slasher Season, and I will see you again tomorrow.